Morning. We're on Daf Yud Aleph, and we're up to Ravina. So let's see if we can find the place here. It's two lines down from the top of Yud Aleph Amid Aleph. Ravina Savrla Ki Rabbi Yochanan. So let's just review. According to Rabbi Yochanan, after one of the brothers gives chalitza to the Yevamah, then he downgrades through his chalitza the Iser Erva from Eshes Ach down to a separate lav. And that, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is uniform for all the Achim and for all the tsaros. And the question is, the brisa that we studied back on Daf Yud Amid Beis, how do we interpret that brisa according to Rabbi Yochanan? So let's just very quickly turn back to Daf Yud Amid Beis, and we'll take a look at the brisa. The brisa says, "Hacholetz liyavimto." This is approximately 10 lines up before the bottom of Yud Amid Beis. Is v'chazav v'kidcho umeis tzricha chalitza min ha'achim. And that's the Reisha. Now we'll fast forward a little bit to the Sefer, Ema Sefer. It says, Omad echad min ha'achim v'kidcho ein la alav klum, which means that ein kedushin tovsin, and she doesn't need a get. That's against Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan holds that she's chayve lavim, and therefore kedushin tovsin. Now, immediately when we see this Gemara, we begin to think about Rabbi Akiva, and that's going to be Ravina's approach, because Rabbi Akiva, if you recall, was the one who maintains that ein kedushin tovsin b'chayve lavim. I saw John, but I don't see him now. Okay. He says the following. Ravina Savrla Ki Rabbi Yochanan u'mitaritz la liba derabbanan. He's going to interpret the Reisha of the brisa according to the Rabbanan. Acholetz liyavimto v'chazav v'kidcho tzricha chalitza min ha'achim. She needs chalitza min ha'achim. Okay. Man achim. But we have to see who the Rabbanan are. And he says, achim hanoladim. So this means that achim who are alive already at the time of the first Ach, of Reuven who died. Ukeman ki Rabbi Yochanan. So the Reisha certainly reflects the Shita Rabbi Yochanan. And as far as Rabbi Yochanan is concerned, after Chalitza, there's no Chiyuv Kares. And the Achim were Ba'olamo Shel Reuven. And when Reuven died, his wife fell in front of the Achim for Yibum. And even if one of the brothers, we'll call him Shimon, already implemented Chalitza, but nevertheless, she falls for Yibum. And now if Shimon dies, once again, she falls for Yibum. And the reason for this is because even if Shimon had no right to marry her because of Chayve Lavim after Chalitza, but nevertheless, his Kiddushin are valid because it's only an Isser Lav. And as far as the other brothers are concerned, again, we have just a Chiyuv Lav, and therefore there is zikas yibum, and she requires chalitza. So in my Gemara, he has here a diagram, and I know that John has the Gemara, but I don't know where John is today. Jeff, you don't have the Gemara, do you? No. Okay. I'll just read to you quickly. Just for the record, this is diagram number Sadi Vav, and I think we've seen it more or less in one form or another. Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda are brothers. And we'll see Yisachar and Zvulun will be born a little bit later. Yehuda marries Sarah. Yehuda dies without children, and Sarah falls in front of the brothers for Yibum. Levi comes forward, and he gives chalitza to Sarah. Sarah now becomes Asura, as far as Levi is concerned, and as far as the brothers are concerned, with an Isur Lav, because again, we're going to Rav Yochanan. Now, after Levi was Choletz, then Chazav V'Kitsha, he married her. So now Levi is married to Sarah. And Kedushin Tovsin B'Chayve Lavin. And now, two more brothers are born. And they are Yisachar and Zvulun. Levi dies, and Sarah falls in front of the brothers for Yibum. Sarah needs chalitza from the Achim HaNoladim. So the Achim HaNoladim in this particular scenario are Ruvain and Shimon. And again, all this reflects Rabbi Yochanan's Shita that even as far as the Achim is concerned, the chalitza only generates a lav, and in the case of chayv lavim, you require chalitza. Now, with regard to Yisachar and Zvulun, there would be no possibility of Kiddushin because she is Asura B'Isur Eishes Ach. She is the wife of Yehuda. And as far as Zvulun and Yisachar are concerned, they were not alive at the time of Yehuda. They didn't overlap at all with Yehuda. That's called Eishes Ach. Sheyesh lo banim or shelo b'makom mitzvah, and ein kedushin tosim b'chayvei lav. And even if Zvulun and Yisachar were born after Levi, after his chalitza married her, she still is Asura Aleim, because we're going now according to the Rabbanan of Rab Shimon, she'asurim afilu b'yibum, even b'yavam v'achkach noah. Even though the Yibum took place before they were born, Yisachar and Zvulun, which according to Rabbi Shimon would not be Eishes Achim Shelo Haybalah, but we're going according to the Rabbanan, Eishes Achim Shelo Haybalah. So all this fits in to Rabbi Yochanan. Now we get to the Sefer. Amad Echad Min Hayiludim, which means we're talking about Yisachar or Zvulun, and they were born again after Levi was Makadisha, the Kidsha, Ein Lo Love Klu, because again, as we said before, that's an Isur Kares, and Ein Kedushin Tosim B'chayve Krisus. And again, the Isur Kares is not a result of the chalitza, but simply because of achiv shelo haya ba'olamo. Eishes achiv shelo haya ba'olamo. Keman Kirabanon. And this reflects the Shita Rabbanon, who say they maintain that the wife of Reuven is Asura Levi, Shalohoy Bolomo Shal Reuven, even if Shimon was Miyabem, Ashes Reuven, before the birth of Levi. So that's what we have here. That's the sugya of Ravina. Okay. Now we have a sugya of Achar Yibum Ba'achiv al Tsaros. So let's just give a little bit of introduction here. And this you'll find in the Mesifta on Yud Aleph, Amid Aleph, at the end of Beis. Adam shemeis below banu, v'niach kamen nashim, ein misyabenes ela achas mihem bilvad. So only one of the various wives that he has will fall for Yibum. In liachar sheyibem es achas, ba al ishto ashniya shel eshes ames, shel achiv ames, harehu over bi'eseh. Shenemar asher lo yivne es beis achiv. Okay. Now, what does this pasuk teach me? Asher lo yivne es beis achiv. Bayis echeru bone v'eno bone shnei batim. And there's no such thing as shnei batim. So that if, let's say, Shimon was miyabem Sarah, and then Shimon was miyabem Leah, Sarah, he violates an essay. And you might think he's being very pious, Zeh Keli Manveu. Instead of lighting one Hanukkah candle, I'll light two Hanukkah candles. Instead of being miyabim one of these two women, I'll be miyabim both of them. No. The Torah says, Bayis echad below shnei bat. Now you would think, logically, that there should be a chiyuv kares over here, because if there's no mitzvah of yibum, because Bayis echad yivnei, he's already mekayim yibum with one of the wives, then without the mitzvah of yibum, we go back to Eshes Achiv. But that's the chiddush over here. And that's called hisnaskus. You remember that word hisnaskus that we spoke about? We'll get back to it in Mitzvah today in the Yalkut Abiurim. And the Torah takes away the Isur Kares and brings it down to an essay. Or maybe in the Rashba's reference, there should be no Isur at all, and the Torah jacks it up to an Isur essay. Itmar. We learned in the Beis Medrash, Haba al Yevamot. The Achakach, and afterwards, Ba echad min ha'achim al tzarasa, is pligi ba Rav Achav Ravina Chad Omar b'kares, v'chad Omar b'essay. Now, this machlokas sounds awfully similar to the machlokas between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Because as far as the choletz is concerned, as far as the miyabim is concerned, if he went ahead, he was miyabim a second wife of his late brother Reuven, then he violates an essay. There would not be any karetz. me just 1 second. Did I say Reish Lakish? I'm sorry. If I said Reish Lakish, cross that out. What I meant to say was Rabbi Yochanan. So again, according to Rabbi Yochanan, not only vis-a-vis that one brother that was Miyabim Rachel is Leah Asura Bisur Esei, but even vis-a-vis all the other brothers, Leah is prohibited Bisur Esei because Rabbi Yochanan accepts the uniformity rule. But according to Reish Lakish's shita was that the choletz has a special status of hisnaskus, downgrading the level of these. That does not apply to the rest of the brothers. The rest of the brothers, right? Like we said, Igloy Milsam Afreya, that they weren't included in Yibum. Or for that matter, the rest of the tzaros. One of the wives of Reuven was selected for whatever reason for Yibum, and as far as the other brothers are concerned, or the other tzaros are concerned, there's no mitzvah of Yibum at all. So we go back to an Iser Karetz. So the Gemara indeed offers this interpretation. Man di Omer b'Kares. Again, we don't know if it's Ravacha or Ravina. Is Reish Lakish. He's holding like Reish Lakish, that once there's chalitza, or in this particular case, Yibum, and the status and the relationship between the tzaros and the achim is that of an Iser Kares. Because the hisnaskus only applies to the choletz, or in this case, to the yavam. Umandi Omar bi Esei, that even vis-a-vis the tzaros and the other brothers, all we have is an essay, ki Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan holds that once the chalitza takes place, her status vis-a-vis the choletz and vis-a-vis all the other brothers is that of a lav, or in the case of Yibum, of an essay. And now we talk about the famous sugya of tzaras sota. So what is tzaras sota and what is a sota? So the husband gave his wife kinui and stira. Well, he gave his wife kinui and she did the stira. So he warned her, don't go into a private place with so-and-so. That's called kinui. And she violated that warning, that kinui, and she went ahead and she was misyached. She went privately with that person. Now, we don't know exactly what happened in that private place. There are no witnesses. But the Torah says that in this case, because of the suffix and the circumstantial evidence, where there's smoke, there's fire, it doesn't look too good that she violated kinui and she went privately with this man. And therefore, the Torah says v'nitma'a, that because of this suffix, she's considered in a state of tumah. Now, she can get out of that state if she successfully survives what we call mayim hamarorim, if she drinks from the bitter waters. But right now, she is nitma. She's in the state of tumah sota. And that state will generate an iser on her baal. Now, this is what's called a suffix sota. We have a case of a vadai with Adim came in and they testified on this nus. Then she's asur al baila olamis for all time. She's also asur on the boel olamis. Now, what happens? She's a sota, and her husband dies without children, leaving surviving brothers. Does she fall for Yibum to the brothers? And the answer is no. And the logic of it is because since the late husband had no heter to live with his wife, maybe he didn't get a chance to bring her, to drink for the Beit Mara. Well, actually, we're talking about right now Avadai Sot. Let's just focus our attention on Avadai Sot. So we have two Eidim that testified Shazinsa. He certainly is not allowed to resume any intimate relationship with his wife. So basically, the marriage itself is Paka Ishus. Why? Because you can't have Ishus without a Heter Bia, and now she's a Sota. Now, if there's no Ishus, then when he dies, there's not going to be any Zikas Yibum. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav, regard to a Sota, and we have two Eidim that testified that she had znus, and now she died. Now he dies, her husband, and she's asur al baila, and he dies without children. There's no yibum, there's no chalitza. What if the husband had another wife? Maybe that's why he wasn't treating his first wife so properly. I don't know. But in any event, she's a tzaras sota. Says Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav, tzaras sota asura. Meaning she doesn't fall for yibum or for chalitza. Now this halach is a pella. I mean, we spoke about tzaras sota. I'm sorry, we spoke about tzaras erva in a case of chayve krisis. Right? So if, let's say, Eishes Achiv falls for Yibum, and she has a tzara, so the erva now expands to the tzara, and there's no Yibum on the tzara. But in the case of Sota, we're not talking about an erva. Unless we say the following, that since there's no Yibum in the case of Sota, is therefore ipso facto, we go back to Eishes Ach. Would that be enough to pater up the tsar? So tsara sota sura tuma ksivba karayis. But just like in the Parsha of Arayis, it says al titamu b'kol ele. So too in the Parsha of Sota, it says v'nister avi nitma. So we're going to have a gzeir shavet tuma tuma. And that's going to teach us that her din as a Sota is the same as an erva, and it patters up the tsara miyibum. I don't understand why we need this puzzle, this gzeir shavet. I mean, typically mishu meishes ach. I have a feeling that this Gzeira Shava is teaching me that there's no Yibum to the Sota herself. I don't need a pasuk to pater up Hatzara, because if there's no Yibum for the Tzara, then there's an Isser Shasah. But how do I know there's no Yibum? I mean, after all, Sota is only an Isser La. Why does it qualify like like to be compared to an erva to completely exclude Yibum? But then I need this drasha, this Gzeira Shava, to Arayos, that the Tumah of a Sota is equal to the Tumah of Arayos. So we have a common link between Isser Sota and all Arayos, and that is Tumah. And from that common link, the Gzeira Shava is going to teach me that there's no Yibum. And if there's no Yibum, Mamela, it goes back to H's Ach, and therefore the Torah is Asur. Masiv Rav Chizda. So here the Masifti tells you to look on Daf Pei Zayin Amid Beis. Isha shaholach bailo limdina sayam uba eid echad the amrla meis bailech hitiru bezdin li nase al piv nisali acher yakach ba bailo. This is pretty embarrassing. The Bezdin relied on the testimony of one witness, allowed her to get married, because the witness testified that her husband died, and lo and behold, he's alive and kicking. So the Gemara later on is going to establish that she can go back to her first husband and resume her marriage. Now I'm saying, according to the Torah law, she can resume her marriage. And there's no sota here, even though she's lived with another man. But she lived with another man based on the heter of Bezdin, the Bezdin allowed her to get married. So as far as her nisuin, her relationship with the second husband, she's what's called an anusa. It's like circumstances beyond her control because she relied on Bezdin. So we're going to go back to the parsha of Sota in Naso, and it says, "Evehi lo nitfasa," and from that we derive havel nitfasa harehi muteres. So a married woman who never was raped, she can still resume her relationship with her husband, no problem. And here too, that this woman, under the assumption that her husband was dead, got a court decision that she can get remarried. So she's like the hilo nitfasa. I mean, the opposite of a hilo nitfasa. Sota is hilo nitfasa. This is called hi nitfasa because she relied on the heter bezdin. But that's all on a doraisa level. A woman who got a heter bezdin and got remarried, she's an anusa. And therefore she can go back to her first husband. Now we get to the Darabanan list. What's the status of this woman who got a heter bezdin based on the testimony of one aide to the effect that her husband died? She got married to a second husband, and lo and behold, her first husband's alive and well. So the Rabbanan instituted a very severe knas, a penalty. Teitze mizeh umizeh. I mean, you don't have to tell me that she can't be married to the second husband. But not only that, she can't even be married to the first husband. Now, why does she deserve the knas if she got a heter bezdin? And the answer is that bezdin relied on her, which is called chazaka, what's called chazaka isha daiko mitzvah. That before she would marry someone else, she would certainly clear, do every investigation, don't leave any leaf unturned until she absolutely is certain that her husband's dead. Apparently she didn't do so. Her husband is alive. So she deserves a penalty. And as a result, the Rabbanan said she can't go back to resume her first marriage, even though her husband is alive. You would think, oh, great, my husband is alive. Let her go back and resume that marriage. Okay, now we're up to Yibum. Her first husband dies. Again, he had to deliver a get, but Nebuchadnezzar is gestorben. He died before he got a chance to give her a get. He never could resume marriage with her because of the knas. I know Steve is thinking, I'm reading Steve's mind here. Burzon, that's the next year. Why are you teaching that in this year? Right? You got the wrong Gemara open. That's what Steve is thinking. But this is a Yibum problem. And we're learning Masechet Yevamot, and the first parak of Yevamot is addressing this question of what's called Saras Sota. That's our sugya for today. This woman who was married went ahead and had a relationship with a second husband, relying on the heter bezdin. She was guilty of not living up to the demand of daiko mitzvah. Her husband's alive. Teitze mizeh mizeh. And now the question is, if her husband, her first husband, which is a legitimate, valid marriage, the best we could do, or the worst we could do, is ask for a get. But right now they're married, and he dies without any children, leaving brothers. So the Mishnah says that the other brothers are choltzim v'lo miyab. And basically what that means is that the status of a sota is that she is excluded, right? Because what are we saying here? We're saying that if there were two Eidim who testified that her husband died and then she got remarried, she's not a sota. Because the Torah says v'lo nitfasa, and this is the case of nitfasa. She was an onus. But in this case, there was only one witness, and Bezdin gave her a kind of, we'll call it a conditional heter. And they said, you can get married, but, first check it out. And they relied on her bedika. She didn't do a proper bedika. And now she becomes a sota. Because her marriage to the second husband was not ba'ones. There was not enough evidence to allow and assume that her husband had died. And therefore, she has the din of a sota. Call it Rabbanan, but Even if it's the Rabbana, but she's a sota, she can't go back to her first husband. And therefore, when her husband dies, her status is that of a sota who fell for Yibum to the other brothers. And apparently in such a case, we're going to require chalitza, but there's no Yibum. And that's against Rabbi Yehuda Marav, because Rabbi Yehuda Marav said that the din of Tzaras Sota is that there's no Yibum, no chalitza, no batich at all. Because basically Rabbi Yehuda Marav looked at the word Tumah and saw in the word Tumah Erva, meaning we read it as Tumah. I mean, Sota is only Chayv Lavin, but Rav is going to read it as if it said Erva. What does that mean? I mean, there's no Isa Kares. How can you call her an Erva? The Torah classifies the Isa as an Erva. Ma'inaf Gemina, that there's no Yibum. And if there's no Yibum, there's no Chalitza. But that's against the Mishnah Daf Pei Zayin, because the Mishnah says that if he dies, this husband, the so-called dead husband, now finally does die. Now we have Eidim that he died. And he leaves his wife as a Yevama for Yibum, then in such a case, the brothers have to give a chalitza. Why do they have to give a chalitza? If a sota has been upgraded to the status of an erva, then an erva doesn't need chalitza.
Did I lose him?
What'd you say, Steve? I thought you said something. Again, Rabbi, so just to summarize, we have here a stira between a Mishnah later on in Masechet Yevamot and Rav. Whereas Rav says that in the case of a sota, there's no Yibum, there's no Chalitza. We upgrade her status to have an erva by virtue of the Gzeret Shabbat Tumah Tumah. And the Mishnah says, no, the brothers need to give a Chalitza when the sota falls for Yibum. Again, there won't be Yibum because she still remains in the status of an Isa Lav, but Chalitza we require. Apparently, the Mishnah rejected this Gzeret Shabbat Tumah Tumah against Rav. Reb Shimon Omer, in Meis Harishon Muteresi Li Achiv Liyibum. So this is Reb Shimon. Later on, I think it's Tzadi Aleph. You correct me if I'm wrong, Steve. And there, Reb Shimon is saying that after the first husband dies, she falls for Yibum to the other brothers. Yibum Amish. Not just Chalitza. And let's just try to remember, what was the logic of Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon held that since she relied on Bezdin, so she's not called a sot. My Havile Lemevan. Ubi aso chalitzose me achiv shel rishon poteres tsaros. So Reb Shimon thinks that when she married the second husband, she did it ba'ones. She had every reason to believe that her husband died. Again, did she do a great job checking? No. But Reb Shimon said she did what she did, and the evidence came in that her husband is dead. And Eid Echad is made to that effect. And Bezdin gave her a heter to get married. So she's not a sota. And therefore the regular dinim of Yibum apply. Biyasa, which would be Yibum, or Chalitza, and then Poteres Sarasa. Poteres Sarasa means that if two wives of the deceased fall for Yibum, once Chalitza or Yibum was implemented with regard to vis-a-vis one of these women, then all the tzaros are pturos from Yibum. So it seems that Reb Shimon never accepted that in this particular scenario with Eid Echad and the whole spiel, that her status is that of a sota. She's not a sota. She was anusa. Why? Because she had every reason to believe that her husband was dead, based on allowed, etc., based on one aid. In any event, the Mishnah is against Rav, because although the Chachamim disagree with Reb Shimon, and they hold that there's no Yibum for the brothers in this case if the first husband dies, but nevertheless, Lo nechleku ela b'sota atzma. They only disagreed with Reb Shimon as far as the sota herself is concerned. She cannot fall for Yibum. Avol, listen to this. The rasa muteres liyibum. Meaning she deserves a knas according to the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan is not going to go down the line with Reb Shimon. I mean, the Rabbanan is saying she's not such a great tzaddikus. Maybe she thought her husband was dead, but she never clarified that beyond Suffolk. So she deserves a knas. But what about her tzara? There's no reason to impose a knas on her tzara. So the knas is to consider her as if she were a sota. But that's only vis-a-vis herself, because she didn't do her due diligence in clarifying that her husband, achen, mace. But as far as the tzara is concerned, she should fall for Yibum. I mean, she doesn't deserve any knas. And he writes here as a summary, Harei lanu, ki tzoras eshes isha shenivala tachas paila, l'divrei hakol muteres liyibum. Nobody denies that the tzara falls for Yibum. There was a machlokes between the Chachamim and Reb Shimon as to whether or not she falls for Yibum. And Reb Shimon said she's guiltless, in quotation marks, and therefore she should fall for Yibum. There's no need to impose a knas. And the Rabbanan said she's no tzaddikus, and therefore we're going to disqualify Yibum, but Chalita is still necessary. But as far as the tzara is concerned, nobody disagreed. The tzara falls for Yibum. I mean, why not? She was not guilty of it in any sense. I mean, Lomi boy Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon holds that she herself it falls for Yibum, and she doesn't deserve a knas. She's not a sota at all. But even if we hold she is a sota, like the Chachamim of Reb Shimon, and therefore she doesn't fall for Yibum, we're denying her the possibility of Yibum. But nevertheless, nobody would say that the tzara is excluded from Yibum. And that's against Rav, because Rav was of the opinion that a sota is upgraded to the status of Tuma, meaning an erva, and therefore she should pater up hatzara like any erva that paters up hatzara. Amal Charav Amina Loch Ana Sota Dorais. My discussion and my statement that I told you that Tzara Sota is Asura Labaila, that's only Doraisa. What does that mean? It's only Doraisa? In other words, Rav is talking about a full-fledged regular Sota that had deliberate relationship with another man. So she's a Vadai Sota Doraisa. She falls now for Yibum. And Rav says she patters up Hatzara. At Amritli Sota Derabana. On a Doraisa level, this woman who thought that her husband died is an Anusa. She does not have the status of a Sota. Midrabanan, according to those rabbis who disagreed with Rav Shimon, they held she's not a tzaddikus, and that she deserves a penalty. But there's no penalty for the tzara. So that Rav is saying, I agree with everything, all your calculations and all your conclusions are correct. But that's not a contradiction to me, because I was talking about a case of a Sota Doraisa with two Eidim that testified that she had that znus. She's a Sota Doraisa and she patters up Hatzara because she has the status of an Erva by virtue of the Gzera Shava Tuma Tuma. He writes here, Vada yesh lechalik beineim. We should make a distinction between a Vadai Sota and this kind of Knas Sota, the Rabban. V'lomar, she Sota asur min Torah biyavam mishum tuma. V'af tzaras asura kedin tzaras erva, because we said tuma means arayos. Avol Sota sheina asur biyavam el mirabanan. Lo echmiru ba chachamim lesar afes tzarasa. As we said before, we want to impose a knas through Rabbanan to prevent Yibum. That's only as far as she's concerned. That should in no way impact and undermine the Yibum to the tzar. So now the Gemara goes back to Rav Chisda, who asked this kasha and raised this objection to Rav, who did karila, my karila. What were you thinking, Rav Chisda? How did you take this jumping point, this keresh kvitzah, to make an analogy between a sota d'Rabbanan with a knas and a sota d'Oraisa with two Eidim? What kind of a comparison did Rav Chisda have in mind? A Sava called the Tikkun Rabbanan came to Oraisa Tikkun. That if the Rabbanan considered her a sota, not according to Rav Shimon, but according to the Chacham who disagree with Rav Shimon, and they say that she was guilty because she did not fulfill her responsibility to check out whether her husband is achein dead or not. Once the Rabbanan, says Rav Chisda, upgraded her status to that of a sota, a raya, there's no yibu. and the Rabbanan said she's guilty, blah, blah, blah. Now let's take it all away. The Rabbanan are saying that she is a sota. She was guilty when she went ahead and married a second man. And now, once the Rabbanan gave her the status of a sota, everything else, all the chips fit into place. These are the repercussions. She doesn't fall for Yibum, and the tzara doesn't fall for Yibum. You'll ask me the kasha, the Rabbanan were only interested in penalizing her. What shaykhus does the tzara have? But the answer is the Rabbanan gave her the status of a sota. And it's tzara sota, I mean, in the 15 arayos of our Mishnah, the tzara eina misyabemis. Why? I mean, I understand the erva should, this halacha that an erva patters up a tzara. If that be the case, then if the Rabbanan gave this woman the status of a sota, he would patter up a tzara. That's what Rav Chizda was thinking. He writes here, the kol takarish tiknu chacham tiknua ke'ein din Torah. The im sota oraiso seres torasa b'ibu is meyakshish the tiknu chachamim that this woman sheshama shemeis baila and she didn't do her due diligence, they made her into a sota, then she should be included in all the dinim dorais that apply to a sota. And that means a soto seres es sarasa. And therefore, Rav raises the following objection. I mean, Rav Chizda raises the following objection to Rav. Why does the Mishnah say that the tzara is muteres b'yibum? Now, I'm going to take a stab at the following question. Why is Rav not impressed with Rav Chizda and Rav Chizda's logic? And I would say that when it comes to the Rabbanon's rabbinic laws that were instituted by the Chachamim, you can divide them into two categories. There's one category called a gzera, or an isa d'Rabbanon, and then there's something called a knas d'Rabbanon. And there's a fundamental difference between the two. When it comes to an isa gzera d'Rabbanon, then you apply the rule of kol detika Rabbanon came doraisa tika. If the Rabbanon created an isa, it's going to be like the doraisa. They're going to pattern it or as a spin-off of a doraisa. But not in the case of knas. Knas doesn't mean we have to call her a sota. Knas means that we have to penalize her, give her a patch. But it doesn't have to affect the tzara. Masechet Rav Ashi. So if Rav Chizda was unsuccessful in slugging up Rav, maybe Rav Ashi would be successful. And he's going to quote the beginning of Masechet Sota. Nichnasa imo l'seiser v'shasa sham v'shasa imo kidei tuma asura lebeisa the asura lechal truma the emes choletzes v'lo misyabemes. So now we're talking about a real bona fide sota without Eidim, but there was Kinui, there was Stira. Again, it may have been Eidim on the Stira, but they don't know that they don't know anything about the Znus. And the Mishnah Paskins that, of course, she cannot resume any relationship with her husband unless she drinks from the Meimarim successfully, and she cannot eat Truma. And that means that if she's married to a Kohen, and until this point she's been eating Truma, Now she has the din of a zona, and the psul zona is a psul in achilas truma. She cannot eat truma. But now what happens if her husband dies without any children? Choletzes, we're on Yud Aleph on the base, v'lo misyabemes. Now, again, obviously this is against Rav, because Rav was of the opinion that a sota does not require chalitza, nor does hatzara require chalitza. But what's the inherent logic here? And this takes us back to the sugi of chayvei lavim, where we said that chayvei lavim who fall for yibum, they require chalitza, but there's no yibum. Amalach Rav, amina lachana. Meaning, let's go back to my statement that the sota doesn't need chalitza. That's only sota vadai amart li. Oh, I see. You read it like this. Ana besota vadai, comma, the amrit li misota sofek. I was talking about a case where there were two Eidim. Now, what's the logical difference? I mean, I understand in Rav's case, there were two Eidim that saw this nus. But the Torah says that even in the absence of two Eidim, we'll call it circumstantial evidence, we consider her v'nitma. So I guess what Rav is saying is that, yeah, the Torah calls it v'nitma, but it doesn't give it the status of an Erev. It gives it the status of chayvei lavim. And chayvei lavim, we said over and over again, require chalitza, no yibum, but chalitza. When did Rav completely exclude both yibum and chalitza? That's only in a case where there were two Eidim. If there were two Eidim, then we have vadai tuma, and through the Gzeir Shava, we equate vadai tuma with an erva. Her status is that of an erva. She doesn't fall for yibum, and she patters up at tzar. But in a case of a sota, which is a safek, we don't know that she is a sota, and we know that she's a sota with regard to the kinui. She violated the kinui, and that gives her the status of a sota, and she's asura l'bayla, but it's only an isa la. It's not an erev. You need a state of vadai in order to create an erev. So just to end the shir, the Gemara says, Maishna sota vadai. Sota vadai means there are Eidim that she had as nus, and there's no Ibum, there's no chalitza. Mishum dechsiv bas tuma is sota sofek nami tuma ksive. I mean, the whole institution of sota, as far as Yibum is concerned, that she's excluded from Yibum and chalitza, is derived from the fact that tuma is being upgraded to the status of an erva. The same thing should apply in the case of sofek, where she violated the kinui. And we don't know, whether she had this beer relationship, this nus or not. The Torah calls her a mitzvah. The Torah says, therefore, she can't go back to her husband, can't live with her husband. So obviously the Torah is considering her an erva because the word Tumah means erva. So I still don't understand, says the Gemara, how you, Rav, can differentiate between a case where Aiden testified on this news and a case where we have Kini and Stira. Okay, then. So that's where we'll stop for today. Let's just I just like to always make a note of it at the end. All right, I'll have to do that. 1 second, maybe I have it. Yeah. Okay, then. So we're up to this Sanya here on Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis. This Sanya Rabbi Yosef. That's how many lines? We have 5 lines down from the top. And then both. So tomorrow, if you can come to the LC, we'll be able to resume our attempt to get things back to normal, even though, as you and I know, things are far from normal, but we're trying to do the best we can. Okay, then? And I want to thank you because I really appreciate that you open up your camera. I mean, in the previous year, which was like Daf Yomi, I had 3 names on a screen. Was anybody behind those names? Basically, I hope they were there. I don't know. Very frustrating. I don't know what to do. I haven't found a human solution to the problem. All right. Have a great day.